China is an interesting country because one thing which fascinates me that there is no concept of a god in that country. And God means a different...
not in our sense of the word. Yeah,
they mean spirit.
They have an idea of nature, of forces which work and so on, but not in the deification sense. In the Western or Levantine sense of a god who manipulates things, and not that kind of god. What they do is they deify. They trace their ancestry back to the person who invented agriculture or the person who taught them hunting and fishing, and they made them into gods. But these are, at least in their tradition, human beings who did great things. The god of war, Kuan Yin, was a historical figure and died actually in battle. But because he's known as a very great general, he's treated as a god of war. There are temples to him, and soldiers go and pray for success at his temples. But it's not God in the sense that you and I would think of God. But then, what we think of as God in India also is not the same as what the Jews or the Christians think of as God, and what Hindus think of. When you say Brahman, that's not a concept that, whereas the Christians will tell you the Son of God. And these are ideas that are more complicated. So I think the trouble is we use the same words. We call all these religions. They're not all identical. Chinese religion, so-called Confucianism, the legalism and all, this is not religion. This is more political philosophy. But we didn't have a conflict in 86. In 86, what happened was we discovered that the Chinese had come across the line and created a permanent outpost on our side of the high watershed in the eastern sector, near east of Taiwan, actually, in a place called, the Chinese call it Wangdong, we call it Sumdrongchu. We use the Tibetan word for that river. And so we moved troops up, and they were within meters of each other in a face-off. And then it took a long time to negotiate that.
How did you do that?
But it became much more than just a negotiation about one face-off. It became a negotiation about the nature of the relationship. And finally, Rajiv Gandhi visited China in December 88, and we agreed a basic modus vivendi that, look, we'll discuss and settle all these kinds of issues peacefully. And we set up an expert group and we started. Separately, we will cooperate where we can, because until then we weren't even, trade was something like $200 million or something. So we said, like, trade, and we'll cooperate on the international stage where we have common interests, whether in WTO or whether in the climate change negotiations and so on. So we'll change the nature of the relationship from one where, since the 62 war, we had not been talking, where we were confrontational, we had no mechanisms to deal with face-offs and all these situations. Then we started the process of the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement in '93. All that process started. So that was in some ways the trigger for changing the nature of how we both dealt with the relationship. We didn't settle the boundary problem. But we found ways of managing it and living with it. And it kept the peace and it kept the border the way it was for almost 30 years. Until this decade, the last decade, when from 2013 onwards the Chinese started changing their behavior.
What changed? What changed?
I think politically also they had developed much more, and so I think they decided that they wanted to show also the nature of the relationships had changed. Their relationship with the US has deteriorated steadily in the last decade, and our relationship with the US has got better and better. And I think they were convinced that they wanted to, in 2020, when they did what they did in Galwan and along the whole line actually, I think what they were trying to do was to show us both that, that we should deal with China straight rather than depend on the US, or the US shouldn't depend on us. I think that was what they tried. It didn't work. Not 100%. Worked to some extent, but we're still not patrolling everywhere where we were before, but basically it didn't work. So it's still now a political impasse. If you look at it, there are over 100,000 troops up there in the western sector. They've spent 3 winters up there, and there's no sign that they won't have to spend more. So politically at least your relationship is in a jam now. Economically you're still trading, all that is going on.
How does it happen, in one way politically you're in jam and, economically you're keeping things
Well,
going?
this is the problem. This is what people keep saying. But the fact is that, Chinese goods keep prices down in India, and Indian consumers need them. So you can't tell Indians, no, now you stop eating because, there's trouble with China on the border. And actually the share of Chinese goods in our exports has risen considerably in the last 15-20 years. So there is advantage to us in getting spare parts, so on, from China, putting it together, exporting it to the world. We make, so we are part of the same global supply chains. And a lot of it is explained by that.